Close your eyes for just a moment. I want you to travel back with me. Try to remember the exact smell of your grandmother's living room on a Sunday afternoon. Was it a mixture of strong, freshly brewed coffee, a hint of pipe tobacco, and perhaps the faint, sweet aroma of a freshly baked apple pie? Think about the sounds that filled the house. The rhythmic, steady ticking of the heavy wooden grandfather clock in the hallway. The sudden, sharp ring of a heavy plastic telephone that made everyone jump. We often find ourselves longing not just for our youth, but for the comforting simplicity of those days. Today, we are going to open a dusty, forgotten box of memories. We will explore 20 everyday objects that were absolutely essential if you grew up in the Netherlands during the 1960s and 1970s. These are the things that built our childhoods, object by object, memory by memory. And make sure to stay until the very end, because the last item we will talk about is something so deeply personal and beautifully innocent, it will surely bring a tear to your eye. Before we gently lift the lid on these memories, let us think about how time itself felt back then. Time moved at a completely different pace. It was slower, more deliberate, and far less demanding. In our modern era, we carry the entire world in our pockets. We demand instant replies, instant entertainment, and instant gratification. But back in those days, waiting was simply a natural part of living. You waited for the postman to bring a letter. You waited all week for your favorite television show to air on one of the 2 channels we had. You waited for the skeletal to boil. And in that waiting, there was magic. There was anticipation. People say that without smartphones and internet, our world was smaller. But in reality, our emotional world was incredibly rich. We did not stare at screens, we looked at each other. We knew our neighbors, we spent long evenings playing board games, and we fixed things when they were broken, instead of throwing them away. The objects we had were built to last, and they became silent witnesses to our family histories. Let us wander back to those magical decades and remember the beauty of a simpler time. Let us start with the heart of the Dutch home, the coal stove, or the kolenkachel. If you were a child in those days, you know that waking up on a winter morning meant your bedroom was freezing cold. You could see your own breath in the air, and ice flowers blossomed beautifully on the inside of the single glazed windows. The only truly warm place was the living room, where the large cast-iron kolen stove stood. Do you remember the distinct, slightly sharp smell of sulfur and burning coal? And you cannot think of the stove without remembering the coal man, the kolenboer. He was a strong man with hands and a face covered in black soot, carrying impossibly heavy burlap sacks of coal through the house or down into the cellar. Lighting that stove was a daily ritual, an act of love and survival. Families naturally gathered around it in the evening, sitting as close as possible without burning their legs. It was a central gathering point, a warm beacon in the dark winter, binding the family together in a single room simply because it was the only comfortable place to be. And speaking of the hallway, sitting proudly on a small table was the classic grey PTT telephone, the famous Model T 65. This was not a device you carried with you, it was a piece of furniture. You had to physically walk to the hallway, often the coldest part of the house, to make a call. The receiver was heavy, made of thick, indestructible plastic. But the most memorable part was the rotary dial. Do you remember the tactile sensation of placing your finger in the hole, pulling it all the way to the metal stop and letting it go? That rapid, mechanical ticking sound as the dial spun back to its starting position is a sound forever etched in our minds. Calling someone was an event. It was expensive, so you kept it brief. And because the phone was wired to the wall in a central location, there was no privacy. Your parents could hear every word you said to your teenage crush. We memorized the phone numbers of all our friends and family, a mental address book we still somehow carry with us today, decades later. Now, let us step outside the front door for a moment. Every morning, like clockwork, you would hear the cheerful rattling and clinking of glass milk bottles. The milkman, the melkboer, would leave fresh milk right on your doorstep. Those heavy glass bottles felt so solid in your hands. They were sealed with a thin, shiny aluminium foil cap. If you were the first one to open the bottle, you had the absolute privilege of pressing your thumb through that fragile silver foil. And who could forget that thick, creamy layer of fat that always settled at the top of the bottle? You had to shake it before pouring, or you would get a mouthful of pure cream. Some families even carefully washed and saved those aluminium caps to give to charity. The milkman knew everyone in the neighborhood. He knew who was sick, who was on vacation, and who had just had a baby. He was not just delivering dairy, he was delivering community connection, a friendly chat, and a sense of absolute security. While the milkman brought the dairy, another magical vehicle brought the rest of the store right to our street. I am talking, of course, about the SRV wagon. Do you remember the sound of its bell ringing as it slowly turned the corner into your neighborhood? It was a literal supermarket on wheels. As a child, stepping inside that small motorized shop felt like entering a secret cave of wonders. The space was incredibly narrow, with shelves packed tightly from floor to ceiling with canned vegetables, fresh bread, and household supplies. The smell inside was a unique blend of fresh produce, cardboard packaging, and the exhaust fumes from the engine. For the housewives of the 1970s, the SRV man was a lifeline. He provided a moment of social interaction in the middle of a busy day of cleaning and child-rearing. You would stand inside that tiny aisle, chatting with your neighbors while picking out your weekly groceries. It was convenient, yes, but more importantly, it was wonderfully cozy and personal. Let us move back inside to the living room, especially during the long, dark days of December. No Dutch childhood is complete without memories of the schoolbak, the traditional wooden shuffleboard. Often dragged down from the dusty attic specifically for Sinterklaas evening or New Year's Eve, it was the ultimate family game. Do you remember the smell of the polished wood and the incredibly loud clack of the round wooden discs as they collided? The ritual of sliding the discs, aiming for the narrow slots numbered 1 to 4, required a specific flick of the wrist. Everyone had their own technique. Some threw them with force, others tried a gentle, calculated slide. The atmosphere was always a mix of intense competition and roaring laughter. You would be eating handfuls of spiced peppernoten and drinking warm chocolate milk while cheering for your grandfather or your little sister. The schoolbak brought generations together around a single table, proving that you did not need flashing lights or electricity to have the most wonderful evening of the year. If we walk into the kitchen of the 1960s, there is one object securely mounted to the wall that defined the morning routine: the manual Douwe Egberts coffee grinder. This charming device had a ceramic hopper at the top, beautifully decorated with classic blue or red Dutch landscapes, and a small glass cup at the bottom to catch the ground coffee. Grinding the beans was physical labor. You had to grip the wooden handle tightly and turn it round and round. The sound was a loud, crunchy grinding noise that would wake up the whole house. But the reward was immediate. As soon as those beans were crushed, the most intoxicating, rich aroma of fresh coffee would fill the entire kitchen. It is a smell that instantly transports you back to your mother in her apron, preparing breakfast before the sun even came up. We did not push a button on a plastic machine back then. We worked for our coffee, and perhaps that is exactly why it tasted so much better. And what goes better with that fresh coffee than a biscuit? But in the Netherlands, this brings us to a very specific, almost sacred ritual. The Dutch biscuit tin, or the koekblik, usually beautifully decorated with historic scenes or floral patterns, this tin held treasures like speculaas, stroopwafels, or butter cookies. But here is the golden rule that every single Dutch child learned very early in life. When the tin was opened and passed around the circle during a birthday party or a Sunday visit, you were allowed to take exactly one cookie, just one. Taking two was a massive breach of etiquette. Once everyone had made their careful selection, the lid was firmly placed back on the tin to keep the remaining cookies perfectly crisp, and the tin was put back in the cupboard. This taught us restraint, appreciation, and the value of a small treat. That single cookie, slowly eaten and savored alongside a cup of tea or lemonade, felt like a true luxury. Spring cleaning in those days was not just a chore, it was a neighborhood event, and its soundtrack was the rhythmic, echoing thud of the mattenklopper. The rattan carpet beater was an essential tool in every household. Once a week, heavy wool rugs and carpets were dragged outside, hung over a balcony railing or a sturdy washing line in the backyard. Then came the physical exertion. Mothers and grandmothers would swing that woven rattan beater with surprising force. You could see massive clouds of dust erupting into the sunlight with every single strike. It was a loud, aggressive sound that echoed through the streets, letting everyone know that the house was being thoroughly cleaned. As a child, you were sometimes allowed to help, swinging the beater until your arms ached. The Mattenklopper is a symbol of a time when cleanliness required true physical labor, and the smell of a freshly beaten rug brought back inside was the very definition of a clean home. Speaking of physical labor, doing the laundry was practically an extreme sport. Before the luxury of modern spinning machines, we had the washing machine with a wringer, or the wasmachine met wringer. This terrifying contraption sat on top of the washing tub, consisting of two heavy wooden or rubber rollers. After the clothes were washed, you had to manually guide every single heavy, soaking wet sheet and towel through those tight rollers, turning a crank to squeeze the water out. It required tremendous strength, and every child was warned 100 times not to get their fingers caught in the wringer, as it was genuinely dangerous. The smell of hot water, strong green soap, and damp cotton filled the scullery. Laundry day took an entire day, and the mother of the house was exhausted by the end of it. But seeing those perfectly pressed, flattened clothes dropping into the basket gave a deep sense of accomplishment that is hard to explain to younger generations. If you needed to run errands, you did not jump into an air-conditioned car. You took the bicycle, regardless of the weather, and hanging over the back wheel were the classic canvas bicycle bags, the Fietstassen. They were usually made of thick, stiff, waterproof canvas, often in a dull grey, green or brown colour. They always smelled faintly of damp fabric and rubber. Those bags were absolute marvels of engineering. It was astonishing how many groceries a Dutch mother could fit into them. A sack of potatoes, several loaves of bread, litres of milk and vegetables, all crammed inside. Cycling against a fierce Dutch headwind with a fully loaded set of heavy canvas bags was a true test of endurance. There was a unique kind of freedom and resilience in those rides. The Fietstassen represent the practical, hard-working spirit of the era. No fuss, just pedaling forward, no matter how hard it rained. For the teenagers of the 1970s, the living room radio was replaced by a new obsession, the portable Philips cassette recorder. This chunky rectangular box, with its row of stiff piano keys, was a revolution. The ultimate weekend ritual happened on Sunday afternoons. You would sit cross-legged on the carpet, your finger hovering tensely over the record and play buttons at the exact same time. You were listening to the top 40 on the radio, waiting for your favorite song to start. The tension was unbearable. You wanted to catch the very first note without getting the radio presenter's voice over the music. If the DJ talked through the intro, your entire recording was ruined. We spent hours meticulously crafting mixtapes, carefully writing the track lists on the tiny cardboard inserts with a blue pen. Those cassette tapes, with their subtle background hiss and occasional tape tangles that we had to fix with a pencil, were our most prized possessions. Another quiet, meticulous ritual that happened at the kitchen table was the pasting of trading stamps, or zegeltjes. Whether they came from the local Spar, the Albert Heijn, or the gas station, collecting stamps was a serious national pastime. Whenever your mother returned from grocery shopping, she would hand you the long strip of perforated stamps. The taste of the glue on the back of those stamps is something you can probably still recall. You would carefully lick them and stick them neatly into the designated booklets. It required patience and precision. These booklets were essentially a secret savings account. It took months of dedicated collecting, but finally, when a booklet was full, it felt like winning the lottery. You could exchange them for a beautiful new set of towels, a set of crystal glasses, or perhaps even a new iron. It taught us that saving small things over a long period eventually led to something wonderful. For many families in the 60s, having a hot shower in your own home was a luxury they did not yet possess. This meant going to the public bathhouse or relying on the system of shower coins, the douchemunten, at camping sites during the summer holidays. These heavy, usually brass tokens were your ticket to cleanliness. The ritual was always the same and always stressful. You dropped the cold metal coin into the slot of the meter on the wall, heard the mechanical clunk, and suddenly, glorious hot water poured from the shower head. But the clock was ticking. You had exactly 3 or maybe 5 minutes of hot water. You had to wash your hair, soap your body, and rinse off with military speed. If you were too slow, the hot water would stop abruptly without any warning, leaving you standing under a freezing cold stream covered in soap. It was a chaotic, funny, and incredibly humbling experience that taught us never to take a simple hot shower for granted. Let us return to the comforting warmth of the kitchen. Before the electric kettle silently boiled our water, we relied on the traditional whistling kettle, the fluid kettle. Sitting heavily on the gas stove, this shiny metal pot required patience. You would turn on the blue flame and wait. Slowly, you would hear a low rumbling sound building up inside the metal, then a soft hiss. And finally, as the water reached a rolling boil, the kettle would let out a loud, piercing, joyous whistle that could be heard throughout the entire house. That sound was a signal. It meant that the chores were pausing, that it was time to sit down at the table. Pouring the boiling water into a teapot and watching the steam rise was a moment of true tranquility. The whistling kettle forced us to wait, and in doing so, it carved out a necessary moment of rest in the middle of a busy day, a moment dedicated simply to a warm cup of tea. In the corner of many living rooms or bedrooms sat a device that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. It was the portable hairdryer hood, the Droog cap. For the elegant housewives of the 60s and 70s, going to the salon every week was too expensive. So, after washing and carefully rolling her hair in dozens of tight curlers, your mother would unfold this large plastic hood, place it over her head, and turn it on. The machine was incredibly loud, producing a deep, monotonous humming sound that made conversation completely impossible. The smell was a distinct mixture of hot plastic, warm scalp, and strong floral hairspray. Your mother would sit trapped under that noisy dome for what seemed like hours, peacefully flipping through pages of the Libelle or the Margriette magazine. It was her time, an untouchable hour of forced relaxation, surrounded by the roaring sound of hot air. For the children, the true arena of life was the schoolyard, and the currency of that world was marbles, or knickers. You would carry them in a brightly coloured fabric bag with a drawstring. Every child knew the hierarchy. There were the small common clay ones, the beautiful glass ones with colourful swirls inside, and the massive heavy shooters, the bonken. Do you remember the rough feeling of the playground tiles or the dirt on your knees as you crouched down for a crucial game? The sound of a heavy glass marble rolling across the pavement and sharply striking another is unforgettable. Nickeron was serious business. It taught us about trade, about risk, about the bitter tears of losing your most prized, shiny marble to the neighbourhood champion, and the absolute thrill of winning a pocketful of new treasures. The weight of a full bag of marbles swinging from your wrist made you feel like the richest child on earth. When we were not playing outside, we had a window to another world that we could hold in our hands. The Viewmaster. Made of sturdy red plastic, this stereoscopic toy felt like absolute magic. You would slide a thin, circular white cardboard disc into the slot, pull the metal lever on the side, and look through the viewing lenses. Suddenly, you were looking at bright, vivid, three-dimensional images. We had discs of the fairy tales from the Efteling, with beautifully crafted dioramas of Sleeping Beauty or the Big Bad Wolf. We had discs of distant, exotic countries, of animals from the savannah, and of television heroes. Pushing that lever down with a satisfying click, advancing to the next glowing scene, was hypnotizing. In an era before the internet or colorful digital screens, the Viewmaster provided an intimate, glowing, private theater experience that captivated our imaginations for hours on end. On the wooden desk of your father or grandfather, you would often find a sturdy wooden or cardboard cigar box, a sigarendoosje. Brands like Agio or Ritmeester were household names. Even long after the cigars were smoked, these beautiful boxes were never thrown away. They were far too useful. When you opened one, even years later, you were immediately hit by the deep, rich, sweet scent of dry tobacco leaves and cedar wood. It is a profoundly comforting smell. These empty boxes became treasure chests. Grandmothers used them to store hundreds of loose buttons, needles, and spools of thread. Grandfathers filled them with rusty nails, screws, and unknown metal parts in the shed. And as a child, if you were lucky enough to be given one, it became the perfect hiding place for your most precious secret items, shiny pebbles, dried leaves, or small toys. They were beautiful, practical, and smelled like the men who raised us. It is impossible to talk about this era without remembering the sheer beauty of our physical money, specifically the Dutch guilder, the gulden, and the magnificent Rijksdaalder. Before the euro homogenized our wallets, our coins were heavy, beautifully designed pieces of national pride. The silver Rijksdaalder, worth 2.5 guilders, had a substantial weight to it. When your grandfather pressed one of those large coins into your palm for your birthday, you felt a surge of absolute wealth. You could buy an enormous bag of mixed candy at the local shop with that single coin and still have change left over. The coins had the profile of Queen Juliana and later Queen Beatrix. We remember the smooth edges, the shiny silver surfaces, and the comforting clinking sound they made deep in our pockets. They were not just currency, they felt like real, tangible treasure. And finally, we arrive at the most tender memory of all, a small, beautifully bound book that almost every young girl, and sometimes boys, carried with them. The poetry album, or the poesy album. It was a small, square book, often with a soft, padded cover. You would carefully hand it to your school friends, your teacher, or your grandparents, asking them to write something for you. They would use their very best cursive handwriting, using a fountain pen, to write a short, sweet poem. But the real magic was the poesy plaatjes, the beautiful, glossy, sometimes glittery die-cut stickers they would paste next to the text. Images of angels, kittens, flowers, and children in traditional clothing. Reading through those pages now, decades later, seeing the handwriting of friends we have lost touch with, or the loving words of grandparents who passed away long ago, is incredibly moving. That little album is not just a book, it is a capsule of pure innocence, friendship, and a time when love was expressed slowly, by hand, on a piece of thick paper. As we close this box of memories, we realize something profound. When we look back at the whistling kettles, the heavy telephones, and the poetry albums, we are not just missing the objects themselves, we are missing who we were when we used them. We miss the slow pace of Sunday afternoons, the safety of our parents' home, and a world where waiting was a virtue and connection was purely physical. These 20 beautiful remnants of the Dutch 1960s and 70s remind us that true wealth lies in simple rituals and shared moments. If this journey back in time brought warmth to your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. It helps us keep these precious memories alive. Now, I have an important question for you. Which of these items gave you the strongest memory? Or is there an object from your childhood that I completely forgot to mention? Please write your personal story in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I cannot wait to share in your memories.